He handed me this, a single, crumpled dollar bill from his designer wallet. My own brother. He pushed it into my palm with 2 fingers, like he was touching something unclean. "Here," he said, and the word that still echoes in my mind, the one that broke something inside me, was his next one. "You need this more than I do." He wasn't trying to be kind. It wasn't charity. It was a statement. It was the final punctuation mark on a long and painful sentence that defined my entire existence in his eyes. You are nothing. And the worst part? His wife, Chloe, stood beside him, a perfect porcelain doll with a perfectly plastic smile, and she nodded in agreement. They were a team, a united front of condescension and pity, and I was the family project, the charity case they could feel good about by feeling sorry for. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine as they stood there in the marble entryway of their 6,000-square-foot monument to success, was that in less than 24 hours I would hold their entire world in the palm of my hand, and I would have the power to either save it or crush it completely. I'm so glad you're here to listen to my story. If you've ever felt small, overlooked, or underestimated by the very people who are supposed to lift you up, then this story is for you. I want to know how far this story travels, so please, if you're watching, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It would mean the world to know I'm not alone. It all started 48 hours ago, on a Tuesday that felt just like any other bleak, hopeless Tuesday in a long string of them. The air in my tiny, one-bedroom apartment was stale, smelling faintly of desperation and instant ramen. I was staring at my laptop screen, the cursor blinking mockingly on a blank page. The freelance graphic design work that had kept me afloat for the past 2 years had dried up to a trickle, then a drip, and now, nothing. The last client payment had been a month ago, and my bank account was a war zone. I had exactly $3.47 to my name. My gas tank was on empty, the needle resting so far below the E it looked like it had given up entirely. I had a job interview the next morning, a real one, for an in-house designer position at a small marketing firm across town. It wasn't my dream, not even close, but it was a lifeline. It was a steady paycheck, health insurance, a chance to stop feeling the icy grip of panic every time I opened my wallet. But to get to that lifeline, I needed to cross about 20 miles of city traffic. I needed gas. Just $10 worth. That's all it would take. $10 to potentially change my life. Swallowing my pride is an exercise I've become far too practiced at. It tastes like bile and shame, a bitter pill that never gets easier to take down. I scrolled through my phone contacts, my thumb hovering over the one name I dreaded calling more than any other. Ethan, my older brother. To the world, Ethan was the American dream personified. He was a senior vice president at a major investment firm, drove a blacked-out German SUV, and lived in a gated community where the lawns were greener than my future. He had married his college sweetheart, Chloe, a woman who curated their life for social media with the precision of a museum director. They had 2 perfect kids, a golden retriever, and a mortgage the size of a small country's GDP. To me, he was a constant, glaring reminder of everything I wasn't. He was success. I was failure. He was stability. I was chaos. He was the son our parents bragged about. I was the one they changed the subject on. My hands were shaking as I dialed his number. It felt like admitting defeat on a scale I hadn't yet experienced. I had always managed on my own, through sheer grit and stubbornness. Asking Ethan for help felt like surrendering my last shred of independence. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice clipped and impatient. The background noise, a symphony of clinking glasses and faint, sophisticated laughter. He was hosting one of their famous dinner parties. Of course he was. "Liam? What's up? I'm a little busy here." His tone already had a built-in sigh, the sound of a man being inconvenienced. I tried to make my voice sound casual, breezy, as if this was nothing. "Hey, E. Sorry to bother you, man, I'm in a bit of a tight spot. My card's not working, and I need to get some gas to get to an interview tomorrow. Could I possibly borrow, like, $10? I'll pay you back on Friday. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. It stretched for what felt like an eternity. I could hear him breathing, could picture the look of annoyance on his face. Then, a low chuckle. It wasn't a warm, brotherly laugh. It was cold and sharp. $10? Are you serious, Liam? I could hear him turn away from the phone, his voice muffled but still audible as he spoke to someone nearby. Probably Chloe. It's my brother. He needs $10. The laughter in the background grew louder, a chorus of polite, wealthy amusement at my expense. My face burned with a heat that had nothing to do with the temperature in my apartment. I felt like a bug under a microscope. He came back on the line, his voice dripping with a kind of theatrical pity. You know, Chloe and I are just sitting down to dinner with the Hendersons. Why don't you swing by? I'm sure we can scrape something together for you. And maybe we can have a little chat about financial planning. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. He wanted an audience for my humiliation. He wanted to perform the role of the benevolent, successful older brother saving his pathetic younger sibling. Every instinct in my body screamed to hang up, to tell him to forget it, that I'd rather walk the 20 miles than endure his condescending charity. But I saw the flashing gaslight in my mind's eye. I saw the opportunity of the interview, my one chance to claw my way out of this hole. So, with the taste of ash in my mouth, I whispered, "Okay, I'll be there in 20. The drive to his house was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Each sputtering cough from my old beat-up Honda felt like a personal insult. When I pulled up to the grand, stone-faced monstrosity he called home, I parked on the street, not daring to let my rust bucket of a car stain his pristine, heated driveway next to the Mercedes and the Lexus. Walking up the perfectly manicured stone path, past the professionally lit oak trees, I felt like an intruder from another world. The sound of their laughter grew louder, clearer, as I approached the massive mahogany door. I took a deep breath, straightened my worn-out jacket, and prepared to sell my soul for $10. Before I tell you what happened when that massive door swung open, I think you need to understand something about Ethan and me. We weren't always like this. Our story didn't begin in a marble foyer with him on a throne and me on my knees. It began in a small, cramped, 3-bedroom house in a working-class suburb, with worn carpets and hand-me-down furniture. We were just two boys sharing a room, with a galaxy of glow and the dark stars stuck to the ceiling, and a shared dream of one day escaping our small-town life. But even back then, our paths to escape were fundamentally different. Ethan was practical, pragmatic. He was the one who got straight A's, who became president of the debate club, who knew from the age of 10 that he wanted to go into finance. He saw the world as a series of ladders, and his goal was to climb them, one rung at a time, with ruthless efficiency. Our parents, God rest their souls, saw this, and they worshipped it. To them, Ethan was a sure bet. He was their 401 kelvins, their bragging right, their validation that they had done something right. I was different. I wasn't interested in ladders. I was interested in clouds. I was the kid who sketched in the margins of his notebooks, who spent hours in the garage taking apart old radios and trying to build something new from their guts. I didn't see the world as a set of rules to be mastered. I saw it as a puzzle to be solved, a canvas to be painted. My dreams weren't about corner offices and stock portfolios. They were about creation. I wanted to build something that had never existed before, something that could connect people in a new way. Our parents saw this as a charming but ultimately worrying hobby. "You can't make a living from drawing, Liam," my dad would say, ruffling my hair. "You need a real job like your brother." They loved me, I know they did, but they didn't understand me. And that lack of understanding created a chasm between us, a space that Ethan was all too happy to fill. He became their golden boy, and I became his shadow, the artistic one, a label that felt more like an apology than a compliment. This dynamic solidified in college. Ethan went to a prestigious business school on a partial scholarship, the rest covered by our parents' second mortgage. He thrived, making the right connections, getting the right internships. I went to the state university, studying computer science and fine arts, a bizarre combination that made my academic advisor raise his eyebrows. But to me, it made perfect sense. I saw the beauty in code, the logic in art. I believed that technology and humanity weren't separate things. They were two sides of the same coin. It was during my junior year that the idea first came to me. It was a whisper at first, a crazy what if. What if you could create a social platform that wasn't about curated perfection and fake happiness? What if it was about genuine connection, about sharing vulnerabilities and supporting each other through the tough times? A platform that used sophisticated algorithms not to sell you things, but to connect you with people who were genuinely going through what you were going through, in real time. I called it Connextsphere. For the next 7 years, Connextsphere became my obsession. It was my life's work, my passion, my reason for being. After graduation, while Ethan was climbing the corporate ladder in New York City, I was living on ramen and hope in a tiny apartment in Austin, Texas. I poured every penny I had, every ounce of energy, into building it. I taught myself new coding languages. I studied psychology and sociology. I read everything I could about network theory. I took on freelance design gigs to pay the bills, working 18-hour days, fueled by cheap coffee and an unshakable belief in my idea. I sacrificed everything. I missed weddings, birthdays, holidays. My social life withered and died. I lost a girlfriend who got tired of competing with a laptop for my attention. Through it all, Ethan's star continued to rise. He'd call me from his high-rise office overlooking Central Park, his voice laced with that familiar, patronizing tone. "Still tinkering with that little computer project of yours, huh? You know, my firm is hiring. We could find a spot for you in the mailroom. Get your foot in the door of the real world." He thought he was helping, but every word was a small cut, a reminder that in his world, my dream was a child's hobby. The irony was, Connextsphere was growing. Slowly at first, just a few hundred users, then a few thousand. It was a grassroots movement, spreading through word of mouth. People were tired of the glossy, artificial worlds of other social media platforms. They craved the authenticity that Connextsphere offered. They formed support groups for anxiety, for grief, for new parents, for people struggling with addiction. They found friends, solace, and a sense of community. It was beautiful, and it was real, but it wasn't making money. I had deliberately kept it ad-free, refusing to compromise the user experience. I was running on fumes, my savings gone, my credit cards maxed out. I was so close to the brink, so tired of the struggle, that I almost gave up a dozen times. Then, 6 months ago, everything changed. I got an email from a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. They had been watching Connextsphere. They saw its potential. They saw what I saw. A week later, I was on a plane to California. I walked into a boardroom that was bigger than my entire apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. I pitched my vision, my voice shaking at first, then growing stronger as I talked about the community, the connection, the human element that was the soul of my creation. They didn't just listen. They got it. The negotiations were a blur. Lawyers, term sheets, valuations that made my head spin. It was a world I was completely unprepared for. But at the end of it all, they made an offer to acquire Connextsphere. The number they put on the table wasn't just life-changing. It was generational. It was a figure with so many zeros it looked like a typo. I signed the papers, just like that. 7 years of struggle, of sacrifice, of being the family disappointment, were validated. I was a multi-millionaire. On paper, the catch, the cruel twist of fate, was the escrow period. Due to the complexities of the acquisition, the transfer of funds was going to take weeks, maybe even a month or two. My lawyer assured me it was standard procedure. The money was mine, guaranteed, but it was sitting in a legal limbo just out of reach. In the meantime, I was broker than I had ever been. The last of my freelance money was gone. I had to pay my own legal fees from the deal, which strained my account to that pathetic $3.47. I was sitting on a lottery ticket worth a fortune, but I couldn't even afford to buy a cup of coffee. I didn't tell Ethan. How could I? After years of his pity and condescension, I didn't want to tell him about my success until the money was actually in my bank account. I wanted to show him, not tell him. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized his pathetic little brother had built something more meaningful and, yes, more valuable than his entire portfolio. So I kept my secret, waiting for the wire transfer that my lawyer had finally confirmed was scheduled for the next day, Wednesday. All I had to do was survive one more day, just one more day of being the failure, which is how I found myself driving my sputtering car to my brother's palace of success, to beg for $10, completely unaware that I was walking into the ambush that would change our lives forever. The moment the door opened, the warmth and light from inside spilled out onto the porch, a stark contrast to the cold darkness I had just walked through. It was like stepping into another dimension. The air smelled of roasted garlic, red wine, and money. Chloe stood there, framed in the doorway like a portrait. She was wearing a simple but devastatingly expensive-looking silk dress. Her blonde hair pulled back in a chignon so perfect, it looked like it had been engineered by NASA. Her smile was bright, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes, a cool blue, scanned me from head to toe, taking in my frayed jeans, my slightly too thin jacket, and my worn-out sneakers. The appraisal took less than a second, and in that moment, I knew she had found me wanting. "Liam! Come in," she said, her voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. It was her hosting voice, the one she used for the caterers and the less important guests. She stepped aside, and I walked into the grand foyer. The floor was polished marble that reflected the light from a crystal chandelier the size of a small car. To my right, the living room was filled with people I didn't know, all dressed in casual but clearly expensive attire. They were laughing, holding wine glasses, and making the kind of effortless small talk that comes from a lifetime of comfort and security. Ethan emerged from the crowd, a glass of dark red wine in his hand. He placed a hand on my shoulder, but there was no warmth in it. It was a gesture of ownership, of presentation. "Everyone," he announced, his voice booming with false bonhomie. "This is my little brother, Liam." A few people turned and offered polite, disinterested smiles before turning back to their conversations. I was an interruption, a curiosity, but not an important one. "Let's go to my office," Ethan said, steering me away from the party. "We can talk in there." His office was what you'd expect. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound books that looked like they had never been opened, and a massive mahogany desk that was completely clear except for a sleek laptop and a single framed photo of his perfect family. He closed the heavy door behind us, and the sound of the party instantly muted, leaving us in a heavy, intimidating silence. He didn't sit down. He leaned against his desk, crossing his arms, looking at me with an expression that was one part disappointment, one part exasperation. It was the same look my father used to give me when I brought home a C in algebra. "So," he began, his voice dropping the pretense of cheerfulness. $10, Liam. Really? That's where we are now?" I felt my defenses go up, the shame from the phone call returning with a vengeance. "Look, I told you, it's just a temporary thing. My card's acting up. I have an interview tomorrow." He held up a hand, cutting me off. "Stop. Just stop. I'm tired of the excuses. Temporary thing. Freelance is slow. I've got a big project coming. I've been hearing the same story for 7 years. When are you going to grow up?" Each word was a calculated blow. He wasn't just talking about the $10 anymore. He was putting my entire life on trial. Chloe appeared in the doorway then, holding 2 fresh glasses of wine. She glided into the room and handed one to Ethan. completely ignoring me. She stood beside him, a silent partner in this intervention. "We're worried about you, honey," she said, her voice soft and syrupy, which somehow made it even more condescending. "We see you struggling, and it breaks our hearts. We just want you to be happy, to be stable." Ethan took a sip of his wine, nodding in agreement. "She's right. Look at you, Liam. You're 32 years old. You're living in a tiny apartment, driving a car that belongs in a junkyard, and you're begging your brother for gas money. Is this the life you envisioned for yourself? All that artistic nonsense, all that time you wasted on that computer thing? What did it get you? Nothing. My creation. My 7 years of blood, sweat, and tears reduced to that computer thing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them about the acquisition, about the millions of dollars that were about to land in my account. I wanted to wipe those smug, pitying looks right off their faces, but I couldn't. The secret was a lead weight on my tongue. It felt too fragile, too unreal to share in this cold, judgmental room. They wouldn't believe me anyway. It would just be another one of my crazy dreams. So I stood there and took it. I let them lecture me. Ethan went on a long-winded tirade about the importance of a 401 kelvins, about building a portfolio, about the corporate ladder. He talked about his own success, not in a bragging way, but in a "this is how a real adult lives" way, which was infinitely more insulting. Chloe chimed in with gentle, cutting remarks about how important it is to have a partner you can rely on, about how she could never imagine being with someone who didn't have a clear 5-year plan. They talked at me, over me, around me, as if I were a child who needed to be taught a stern lesson. They dissected my life, my choices, my very character, and found every single one of them lacking, all because I had asked for $10. The final insult was the worst. After about 15 minutes of this relentless character assassination, Ethan sighed dramatically, as if the weight of my failure was a physical burden on his shoulders. He walked over to his desk, pulled out his wallet, a sleek, minimalist leather thing that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and thumbed through a thick wad of $100 bills. He deliberately bypassed them, fishing around until he found a 10. He held it out to me. "Here," he said. "But this is the last time, Liam. I'm not an ATM. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. Maybe this interview tomorrow will finally be the wake-up call you need." I reached for the bill, my hand trembling with a mixture of shame and suppressed rage, but just as my fingers were about to touch it, he pulled it back. A cruel little smile played on his lips. "Actually," he said, "and this is the part that I will never, ever forget." He put the $10 bill back in his wallet. Then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, crumpled, pathetic-looking $1 bill. It was the dollar he'd handed me at the door. "You know what? Take this instead," he said, pushing it into my hand. $10 is a handout. This is a lesson. Go buy yourself a coffee tomorrow before your interview. But the gas? You'll have to figure that out yourself. It's called rock bottom, little brother. Maybe it's time you got acquainted with it." He was smiling. He genuinely believed he was teaching me a valuable life lesson. He thought this act of petty, calculated cruelty was a form of tough love. Chloe stood beside him, nodding her approval, her eyes shining with admiration for her wise, successful husband. I looked at the crumpled dollar in my hand. I looked at their 2 smiling faces, so secure in their wealth, their righteousness, their superiority. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it hardened. The shame vanished, replaced by a cold, quiet, diamond-hard resolve. They had no idea what they had just done. They thought they were pushing me down, but they had just given me the fuel I needed to stand up taller than they could ever imagine. I closed my hand around the dollar bill, the paper crinkling in my fist. "Thank you," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I appreciate the lesson." And I turned and walked out of their perfect house, leaving them to their perfect party. completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break over their perfect lives. Leaving Ethan's house felt like surfacing for air after being held underwater for too long. The cold night air was a relief, washing over my burning face, but it couldn't extinguish the fire raging inside me. I walked back down the stone path, the sound of their party, a distant, mocking echo. I didn't look back. In my hand, the crumpled dollar bill felt both impossibly heavy and utterly insignificant. It was a symbol of my humiliation, a token of my perceived worthlessness in their eyes. I got into my car, the engine groaning to life with a pathetic sputter that seemed to perfectly match my mood. I just sat there for a few minutes in the darkness, the steering wheel cold beneath my hands, and I let the full weight of the evening crash down on me. It wasn't just about the money. It was never just about the money. It was about the complete and utter lack of respect, of brotherly love, of basic human decency. Ethan hadn't just refused to help me. He had savored my desperation. He had used it as a platform to elevate himself, to perform his role as the magnanimous patriarch in front of his wife and, I presumed, his dinner guests. He had taken my moment of vulnerability and turned it into a spectacle. The $1 bill wasn't a lesson in financial responsibility. It was an act of dominance. It was his way of saying, I own you. Your failure is my success. Your struggle is my entertainment. And Chloe, his loyal co-star, had been right there, applauding his performance. I drove away from that pristine, perfect neighborhood, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of anger and hurt. The 20-minute drive back to my side of town felt like a journey across a social and economic desert. The manicured lawns and grand houses slowly gave way to cracked sidewalks, chain-link fences, and modest, aging apartment buildings. It was like watching my own life in reverse, moving from the destination they had reached to the starting point I was still stuck at. When I got back to my apartment, the stale air I'd left behind now felt suffocating. The silence was deafening. I tossed my keys on the small, cluttered table by the door, and the crumpled dollar bill with them. It lay there, a tiny monument to my shame. For the first time, true despair began to set in. The anger that had sustained me on the drive home began to fade, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was a failure. 7 years of my life, poured into a dream that had left me with nothing but an empty bank account and a brother who thought I was worth a single dollar. The interview tomorrow suddenly seemed pointless. How was I even going to get there? Siphon gas from a neighbor's car? Take 3 different buses and risk being late? The logistics were overwhelming, but it was the emotional exhaustion that was truly crippling. I sank onto my lumpy, second-hand couch, the springs groaning in protest. I stared at the ceiling, at the water stain in the corner that looked vaguely like a map of a country I would never visit. I thought about my parents. I wondered what they would think if they could see us now. They had always preached the importance of family, of brothers sticking together no matter what. You two are all you've got, my mom used to say. Look out for each other. We had failed her. Or maybe I had failed Ethan by not becoming the man he thought I should be. The hours ticked by. I didn't eat. I didn't move. I just sat in the darkness, letting the negative voices in my head, the ones that sounded a lot like my brother, have their say. They told me I was lazy, irresponsible, a dreamer who needed to wake up to the harsh realities of the world. They told me I had wasted my potential. They told me I deserved that crumpled dollar bill. It was sometime after midnight when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up the dark room with a cold, blue light. I ignored it. It was probably a notification from my bank, a cruel reminder that my balance was still a pathetic $3.47. It buzzed again, and again. A string of notifications. Annoyed, I reached for it, ready to silence it for the rest of the night. But what I saw on the screen made my breath catch in my throat. It wasn't from my bank. It was a series of emails from my lawyer, Mark. The subject lines were simple, but they hit me like a physical force. Subject: Wire transfer confirmation. Subject: Wood acquisition funds cleared. Subject: Urgent. Call me. My heart started to pound, a frantic, wild drum against my ribs. It couldn't be. It was supposed to be tomorrow. Wednesday. Not Tuesday night. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely unlock the phone. I clicked on the first email. It was a dry, formal notification from the acquiring company's bank, filled with routing numbers, transaction codes, and legal jargon. But at the bottom, one line stood out in stark, beautiful clarity. Funds in the amount of $28,500,000 USD have been successfully transferred. I read it again and again. The number was so large it seemed to blur, to lose all meaning. It was an abstraction, a string of digits that couldn't possibly be real. I clicked on the second email. It was from Mark. Liam, it's done. They pushed it through early. The money is yours. It should be reflecting in your account momentarily. Call me when you get this. Congratulations, my friend. You did it. I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the floor, the screen glowing. I scrambled for my laptop, my fingers fumbling on the keys as I tried to log into my online banking portal. The page was slow to load, the little spinning wheel, a circle of pure torture. And then, the page refreshed, and my world tilted on its axis. The balance was no longer $3.47. The number that stared back at me from the screen was so long it barely fit in the little box. $28,500,003.47. I stared at it, my mind completely blank. I felt nothing. No joy, no excitement, just a profound, hollow sense of shock. It was like my brain couldn't process the information, couldn't bridge the gap between the man who couldn't afford $10 for gas and the man who was now, incomprehensibly, a multimillionaire. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, my legs unsteady. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand shaking so much that some of it sloshed over the side. I drank it down, the cool liquid, a small, grounding sensation in the midst of my mental chaos. Then I went back to the laptop and looked again. The number was still there. It hadn't been a dream, a hallucination brought on by hunger and despair. It was real. And slowly, very slowly, a feeling began to surface. It wasn't the triumphant joy I had always imagined. It was something else. It was the memory of Ethan's cold laugh, the image of Chloe's pitying smile, the feel of that crumpled, insulting dollar bill in my hand. The anger and hurt from earlier that evening came rushing back, but this time it was different. It wasn't the helpless rage of a victim anymore. It was the focused, calculated anger of someone who suddenly had all the power. The interview tomorrow didn't matter. The $10 didn't matter. All that mattered was the lesson my brother had tried to teach me. It's called rock bottom, little brother, he had said. He had no idea how right he was. I had hit rock bottom, and from here, the only way to go was up. And as I stood there, bathed in the glow of my newfound fortune, a new idea began to form in my mind. A plan. It was audacious, it was crazy, and it was perfect. He wanted to teach me a lesson about money? Fine. I was about to teach him one he would never forget. The first thing I did wasn't glamorous. I didn't book a first-class ticket to Fiji or buy a Lamborghini. I picked up my phone, my hand still not entirely steady, and ordered a pizza. A large pepperoni and mushroom pizza with extra cheese, along with a side of garlic bread and a 2-liter bottle of soda. It was the most expensive, most extravagant, most delicious-looking meal I had seen in months, and I ordered it with a sense of profound, almost giddy satisfaction. While I waited for the delivery, I finally called my lawyer back. Mark answered on the first ring, his voice warm with genuine excitement. "Liam, I've been trying to reach you. Did you see it?" "I saw it, Mark," I said, my own voice sounding distant and strange to my ears. "I'm looking at it right now. I don't think it's fully registered yet." He laughed. A rich, happy sound. Give it time. It'll sink in. Listen, we need to talk tomorrow. Seriously. We need to get you set up with a financial advisor, a wealth manager, an accountant. You're in a different league now, kid. You can't just let this sit in a checking account. I know, I said, pacing the small confines of my apartment. We'll talk tomorrow, but, Mark, I have a question. It's kind of a weird one. After the last 6 months, I don't think anything you could ask would surprise me. Shoot. How would I go about paying off someone else's mortgage in full? Anonymously at first, if possible. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the smile in his voice when he finally spoke. Okay, that one's a little surprising. Whose mortgage are we talking about? My brother's, I said, the words tasting like victory. Mark was silent for a moment longer. He was one of the few people who knew the full extent of my financial struggles and my strained relationship with Ethan. He knew about the condescending phone calls and the lack of support. I see, he said, his voice now laced with a tone of deep understanding. Well, that's certainly a statement. It's not impossible, but it's tricky. You'd need the exact payoff amount from his lender, the account number. It's not public information. We could probably get it, but it would take some legal maneuvering. The easier way would be to get the information from him directly. No, I said immediately. That's not how this works. I don't want him to know it's me until after it's done. I want him to get a letter from his bank. A cold, official, confusing letter. Mark chuckled again. I like your style, Liam. All right, let me make some calls in the morning. I have a few contacts in the banking world. No promises, but I'll see what I can dig up. We'll need his address and the name of his mortgage lender, if you know it. I have it, I said. I had helped them move into that house years ago, before the chasm between us had become a canyon. I remembered the name of the bank from the stacks of paperwork on their kitchen counter. I gave Mark the information, my heart thrumming with a strange, powerful energy. This was happening. My wild, impulsive idea was starting to take shape, to become a real, tangible plan. The pizza arrived, and I paid the delivery guy with a $50 bill from the small emergency stash I kept hidden in a book, telling him to keep the change. The look of shock and gratitude on his face was the first genuine human connection I had felt all day. I sat on my floor, not even bothering with a plate, and devoured 3 slices of pizza. It tasted like freedom. It tasted like power. It was the best meal of my life. I went to bed that night, but I didn't sleep. My mind was racing, replaying the scene in Ethan's office, his words, his wife's smile, the crumpled dollar. But now, the memory didn't bring shame. It brought clarity. For years, they had defined our relationship by a single metric: money. Success was measured in dollars and cents. Worth was determined by your net income. They had created the game and the rules. They just never imagined that one day I would be able to beat them at it. The next morning, I woke up to the sun streaming through my window, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel a sense of dread. I felt a sense of purpose. I logged into my bank account again, just to make sure it was still real. The number was there, solid and unwavering. I took a screenshot of it, not to show anyone, but for myself. A reminder that my life had irrevocably changed. I spent the morning on the phone, not with financial advisors, but with the marketing firm where I was supposed to have my interview. I called and politely withdrew my application, wishing them the best of luck in their search. The woman on the other end sounded confused but wished me well. Hanging up felt like severing the last tie to my old life, to the desperation that had driven me to Ethan's door. Around 10 a.m., Mark called back. His voice was triumphant. You are not going to believe this. My contact at the bank's corporate office owes me a huge favor. It took some serious sweet-talking and a promise of my firstborn child. But I got it. I have the account number and the exact payoff quote for your brother's mortgage. Good for the next 48 hours. He read the number to me. It was staggering. It was more money than I had ever thought I would see in my lifetime, let alone my brother's, and it was a number I could now pay off without even noticing the dent in my account. The total is $1,782,451.39, Mark said. Are you sure you want to do this, Liam? This is a serious amount of money. It's not a $10 loan. I looked at the crumpled dollar bill still sitting on my table. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. What's the next step? The next step is a wire transfer, he explained. You can do it from your online portal, or you can go to your bank in person to have them execute it. Given the amount and the delicate nature of the transaction, I'd recommend going in person. It's cleaner, more official. It leaves a very clear paper trail. Going in person. The idea appealed to me. I wanted to feel the reality of it. I wanted this to be a deliberate, physical act, not just a few clicks on a screen. I spent the next hour getting ready. I took a long shower, washing away the grime and the shame of the past few years. I looked at my wardrobe, a sad collection of worn-out jeans and faded t-shirts. None of it would do. I walked to a small, independent men's clothing store a few blocks away, a place I had often walked past, admiring the clothes in the window but never daring to go inside. Today, I walked in like I owned the place. I bought a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, a crisp white shirt, a simple silk tie, and a pair of polished leather shoes. I paid in cash, the crisp $100 bills feeling foreign and powerful in my hand. I walked out of the store a different man. The clothes didn't just change how I looked, they changed how I felt. I stood taller. My steps were more confident. I was no longer the pathetic little brother. I was someone to be reckoned with. I went home, put on the suit, and looked at myself in the small, cracked mirror in my bathroom. The man looking back at me was a stranger. He looked calm, composed, and in control. He looked like he was about to go and close the most important deal of his life, and in a way, he was. I carefully folded the crumpled $1 bill and placed it in the breast pocket of my new suit jacket, right over my heart. A reminder, a talisman. Then, I called a car service, not a rideshare, but a professional black car service, and told the driver to take me to the main branch of my bank, downtown. The war was over. It was time for the victory parade. The ride downtown was surreal. I sat in the back of the pristine black sedan, the leather seats cool and smooth beneath my hands, and watched the city slide by. The world outside the tinted windows looked exactly the same as it had yesterday, but my perception of it had been fundamentally altered. The bustling streets, the towering buildings, the anonymous faces in the crowd, it all felt like a stage, and I was no longer a background actor. I was the one directing the play. When the car pulled up in front of the bank's imposing granite facade, the driver hopped out to open my door. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. It was a level of service, of respect, that was completely new to me. I thanked him, told him to wait, and walked up the wide stone steps and through the revolving glass doors. The bank's main hall was a cathedral of commerce. The ceilings were impossibly high, the floors were gleaming marble, and the air was filled with the quiet, reverent hum of money. People in sharp suits spoke in hushed tones. Tellers behind brass grills counted stacks of cash with practiced efficiency. It was Ethan's world, and for the first time, I didn't feel intimidated by it. I didn't feel like an imposter. I walked straight to the concierge desk, where a woman with a polite, professional smile looked up at me. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you?" "Good morning," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I need to speak with a private banker or a branch manager. I need to arrange a rather large wire transfer." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes gave a flicker of professional assessment. My suit had done its job. I wasn't being dismissed. "Of course, sir. Please have a seat." "I'll see who is available." She gestured to a waiting area with plush leather armchairs. A few minutes later, A man in his late 50s with silver hair and a perfectly tailored pinstripe suit approached me, his hand extended. "Mr. Harrison? My name is David Chen. I'm the branch manager. My apologies for the wait. Please, come this way." He led me not to a small cubicle, but to a spacious, wood-paneled office with a view of the city skyline. The difference in treatment was staggering. Yesterday, I was worth a crumpled dollar. Today, I was worth a private office and the branch manager's undivided attention. We sat down at a large conference table, and he offered me coffee or water. I asked for water, and it arrived moments later in a heavy crystal glass. "Now," he said, folding his hands on the table, his demeanor a perfect blend of warmth and professionalism. "You mentioned a large transfer. How can we facilitate that for you today?" I took a breath. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the piece of paper where I had written down the details Mark had given me. I pushed it across the table to him. "I need to wire this exact amount," I said, pointing to the 7-figure number, "to this mortgage account. Today?" "Mr." Chen picked up the paper. He put on a pair of reading glasses and studied it. His professional composure was flawless, but I saw it. A slight widening of his eyes. A subtle, almost imperceptible intake of breath. He looked up from the paper, then back down, then at me. He was reevaluating me all over again. The suit had gotten me in the door, but this number $1,782,451.39 had just bought me the entire building. "I see," he said, his voice a little quieter now, a new level of respect coloring his tone. "This is a mortgage payoff. A substantial one, may I ask? Is this your mortgage, Mr. Harrison?" "No," I said simply. "It's my brother's." A flicker of something curiosity? Surprise? Crossed his face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He was a professional. His job was not to question, but to execute. "Very well. This is certainly something we can handle. We will need to verify a few things, of course. Standard procedure for a transaction of this size. I'll need your ID and I'll need to confirm the funds in your account." He typed for a few moments on his computer, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then his eyebrows shot up. He looked at my driver's license, then back at his screen, then at me. The final piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place for him. He now knew that the name on the account with the 8-figure balance and the name on the driver's license belonged to the same unassuming man sitting in front of him. The polite respect he had shown me before now transformed into a kind of focused, deferential awe. "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Harrison." "Perfectly in order," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I'll just need you to sign a few authorization forms. We have to document everything for federal reporting requirements." For the next 20 minutes, he and an assistant bustled around, printing forms, making copies, and preparing the wire transfer. As I signed the documents, my hand moving in a steady, deliberate script, a strange sense of calm washed over me. This act, this monumental transfer of wealth, felt less like revenge and more like a correction, a rebalancing of the scales. For years, the dynamic between my brother and me had been hopelessly skewed. He had all the power, all the success, all the validation. I had nothing. Our relationship was built on that imbalance. He was the giver. I was the taker. He was the sun. I was the planet orbiting him, dependent on his light and warmth. This act was me breaking orbit. It was me declaring that I was not his satellite. I was my own star. The final form was placed in front of me. It was the wire transfer authorization. All the details were there, the staggering amount, the mortgage lender's information, the account number. All it needed was my signature. As I picked up the pen, I thought about Ethan. I pictured him at his desk in his high-rise office, barking orders, moving other people's money around, feeling powerful and important. He had no idea that at this very moment, his failure of a little brother was making a financial move that would dwarf anything he had probably done all year. A move that was about to fundamentally alter the foundation upon which he had built his entire life and identity. He had built his castle on the bedrock of financial security, on the pride of being a homeowner, of being the provider. I was about to remove that bedrock, to take away the one thing he held most dear, not by destroying it, but by gifting it to him. It was a Trojan horse of a gift. On the surface, it was an act of incredible generosity, but I knew, and soon he would know, that it was a declaration of war. A war he didn't even know he was fighting, and had already lost. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. The ink was black and final. "It's done," Mr. Chen said, taking the form from me. "The wire has been initiated. The funds should be received by his lender within the hour. They will likely process the account closure and send him an official notification by mail, which could take a few business days." "A letter," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "That's perfect. A cold, official, confusing letter." I stood up, adjusting the jacket of my new suit. I felt lighter than I had in years. I had walked into that bank a man seeking to settle a score. I was walking out a man who had just bought his own freedom. I reached into my breast pocket and my fingers brushed against the crumpled $1 bill. I pulled it out and placed it on the polished mahogany table, right in the center. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Chen," I said. He stared at the dollar bill, then at me, a look of complete bewilderment on his face. He had no idea what it meant, but I did. It was a receipt, payment in full for a lesson learned. I didn't hear anything for 2 days. It was a strange, suspended period of calm after the storm. The black car service had dropped me back at my apartment, and stepping back inside felt like returning to a museum exhibit of my former life. The lumpy couch, the cluttered table, the water stain on the ceiling, it was all still there, but it felt disconnected from me, like a snake's shed skin. The man who lived in that apartment, the one who was desperate and ashamed, was gone. I spent those 2 days in a sort of quiet cocoon. I didn't go on a spending spree. I didn't look at real estate listings. I just existed. I ordered healthy food. I went for long walks in a nearby park, feeling the sun on my face. I bought a new, comfortable bed and had it delivered. And for the first time in years, I slept soundly, deeply, without the gnawing anxiety that had been my constant companion. I was letting the reality of my new life seep into my bones, letting the shock wear off and be replaced by a quiet sense of possibility. The plan had been executed. The wire had been sent. The arrow had been fired from the bow, and all I could do now was wait for it to hit its target. The silence from Ethan was expected. The bank manager had said it would take a few business days for the official letter to arrive. I imagined it landing in their oversized mailbox with a soft thud, nestled between a Pottery Barn catalog and an invitation to a charity gala. I pictured Chloe bringing in the mail, sorting through it with her perfectly manicured fingers, and pausing at the official-looking envelope from their mortgage company. I imagined her slitting it open with a silver letter opener, her brow furrowing in confusion as she read the dense, formal language. "Your mortgage loan has been paid in full. Balance is 0. I played the scene over and over in my head, a private movie that brought me a grim sense of satisfaction. The call came on Friday afternoon. I was sitting by my window, sketching in a new notebook, when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with Ethan's name and picture. My heart gave a single, hard thump, but my hand was steady as I answered. "Hello?" I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Liam? Is that you?" Ethan's voice was tight, strained. He sounded breathless, like he had just run up a flight of stairs. There was none of his usual arrogant swagger, none of the condescending patience. This was a different Ethan. This was an Ethan I had never heard before. "Yeah, it's me. What's up?" I continued to sketch a leaf on my page, my pen making soft, scratching sounds. "What's up? What's up?" he repeated, his voice rising in pitch, cracking with a mixture of panic and disbelief. "I'll tell you what's up. I just got a call. From our bank." from the VP of the mortgage division. He wanted to personally congratulate me on paying off our loan. All of it. He said it was one of the largest single payoff transactions he'd ever seen. He paused, taking a ragged breath. Liam, what did you do? I'm not sure what you mean, I said calmly, adding some shading to the leaf. Don't play dumb with me, he shouted, and I could hear Chloe's frantic voice in the background. They said the transfer came from an account in your name. Liam Harrison! $1.7 million. Where in God's name did you get that kind of money? Did you win the lottery? Are you in some kind of trouble? Did you get involved with the wrong people? Talk to me. His mind was clearly cycling through every possible explanation, from the absurd to the criminal. The one possibility it couldn't land on, the one that was so far outside his realm of understanding that it didn't even exist, was the truth, that I had earned it. That his failure of a little brother had succeeded on a scale he couldn't even comprehend. I'm not in any trouble, Ethan, I said, my voice still infuriatingly calm. And I didn't win the lottery. Then what is it? He demanded, his voice raw with frustration. This isn't a joke. This is our life, our finances. You can't just interfere like this. We have a plan. We have investments tied to our mortgage interest deduction. You've completely screwed up our tax strategy for the next decade. Do you have any idea what you've done? And there it was. The purest, most undiluted Ethan imaginable. Faced with an event of inexplicable, staggering generosity, his first reaction wasn't gratitude. It wasn't even curiosity. It was anger. Anger that I had disrupted his perfectly curated financial plan. Anger that I had done something outside the bounds of his control, of his understanding. He was more upset about his tax strategy than the fact that his life's single biggest debt had been erased overnight. It was so perfectly, tragically him that I almost laughed. So you're not happy about it? I asked. A genuine question. Happy? He sputtered. Happy? I don't know what I am. I'm confused. I'm angry. Chloe is having a panic attack. We thought it was some kind of mistake, some kind of elaborate bank fraud, but they confirmed it. The money is real. The house is paid for. Liam, you have to tell me what is going on. Right now. I think, I said, finally putting down my pen and giving the conversation my full attention, that this is a conversation we should have in person. Why don't I swing by? The suggestion hung in the air, charged with unspoken meaning. The power dynamic had been completely and irrevocably inverted. The last time I had swung by his house, it was as a beggar. Now, I was being summoned as a king, the holder of a secret so powerful it had brought their perfect world to a screeching halt. Yes, he said immediately, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. Yes, come over now. Please. The please was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of his arrogance cracking. It was the sound of his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. I'll be there in 20, I said, echoing my own words from 2 nights ago. But this time, I wasn't the one coming to beg. I was the one coming to collect. I hung up the phone and stood up. I went to my closet and put on the same charcoal gray suit. I walked to the table and picked up my keys. The crumpled $1 bill was gone. I had left it at the bank. I didn't need it anymore. The lesson had been taught, and the receipt had been filed. As I walked out of my apartment and into the bright afternoon sun, I knew that the next conversation with my brother wouldn't be about my failures. It would be about his. The drive to Ethan's house this time was a completely different experience. I wasn't in my sputtering Honda. I was in the back of another immaculate black sedan I had called. The engine was silent. The ride was smooth. I wasn't worried about running out of gas. I wasn't filled with shame. I was filled with a quiet, focused intensity. I was a general on my way to survey the battlefield after a decisive, strategic victory. As we pulled into their gated community, I noticed the small details I had missed before, in my haze of humiliation. The identical, oversized mailboxes, the perfectly spaced ornamental trees, The sheer, suffocating sameness of it all. It was a neighborhood built on the idea of conformity, of keeping up appearances, of ensuring that everyone knew you belonged to the same exclusive club. When the car pulled up to his house, I didn't park on the street. I had the driver pull right up the heated driveway, stopping directly in front of the massive mahogany door. I saw the curtains in the front window twitch. They were watching. They were waiting. I got out of the car, the crunch of my leather shoes on the pristine stone, a loud, deliberate sound in the quiet afternoon. I walked up the path with measured steps. Before my hand even reached the doorbell, the door was pulled open. It was Ethan. He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was a mess. His face was pale, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He wasn't wearing one of his power suits. He was in jeans and a rumpled polo shirt. He looked like a man who had been through an emotional war. Chloe was standing just behind him, her face a mask of anxiety. The perfect porcelain doll had cracks in it. Her makeup was slightly smudged, and she was wringing her hands, a gesture so out of character for the always composed woman I knew. They both stared at me, at my suit, at the quiet confidence I was projecting. It was clear they didn't know what to make of this new version of me. This wasn't the pathetic little brother they had lectured 2 nights ago. This was a stranger. "Liam," Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. "Come in." I stepped into the marble foyer, the same space where I had been so thoroughly humiliated. The air was thick with tension, a stark contrast to the light, festive atmosphere of the dinner party. The house was silent, except for the faint, distant sound of a television playing a cartoon in some other room. "Where are the kids?" I asked. "They're with Chloe's mother," Chloe said, her voice tight. We needed to talk to you alone." They led me not to the intimidating office this time, but to the formal living room. A vast, sterile space with white couches and abstract art that I was sure was meant to look thoughtful and expensive. It was a room designed for impressing guests, not for comfortable living. We all sat down, the space between us on the enormous couches feeling like a mile-wide chasm. For a moment, nobody spoke. They just stared at me, their eyes filled with 1,000 questions, the most prominent one being the one Ethan had screamed over the phone. "Where did you get the money?" Ethan finally broke the silence. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles were white. "Okay, Liam, no more games. You have to tell us what's going on." "The bank confirmed it again this morning. The mortgage is gone. Paid. By you. We've been racking our brains, we haven't slept. It just doesn't make any sense." Did you invent something? Did you get an inheritance we didn't know about?" His mind was still scrambling, trying to fit me into a box he could understand. The idea that I, on my own terms, through my own work, could have achieved this was simply not in his vocabulary. "It's not an inheritance," I said quietly. Chloe jumped in, her voice sharp with a new emotion that I quickly identified as greed. A hopeful, desperate greed. Did one of your designs take off? Did you sell a logo for a lot of money? We always said you were talented, Liam. A little unfocused, maybe, but talented." The revisionist history was breathtaking. Suddenly, they were my biggest supporters, the ones who had always believed in me. The memory of her pitying smiles and his lectures seemed to have been conveniently erased from their minds. "It wasn't a logo," I said, looking from her hungry face to his confused one. I let the silence hang in the air for another moment, drawing it out, making them wait. I had waited 7 years for their respect. They could wait a few more seconds for my explanation. "Then what was it?" Ethan pressed, his voice strained. "For the love of God, Liam! Just tell us." I leaned back against the plush white couch, crossing my legs, a picture of calm. I thought about the best way to tell them, the way that would have the most impact. I thought about all the years he had called it my little computer project, the dismissive, patronizing label he had attached to my life's work. "You know that little computer project I've been tinkering with?" I began, using his exact words. That That computer thing I wasted so much time on? Ethan and Chloe exchanged a confused look. Connextsphere? Ethan said, the name tasting foreign and insignificant on his tongue. What about it? I sold it, I said. The three words just hung there in the silent, perfect room. I watched their faces as they processed the statement. There was no immediate reaction, just a blank, uncomprehending stare. The concept was too alien. Selling a little project wasn't something that resulted in a seven-figure mortgage payoff. You sold it? Chloe repeated, a note of disbelief in her voice. Like, to who? For how much? A few $1,000s? She was trying to quantify it, to fit it into the scale of the world she understood. A hobby, a side hustle. A little more than that, I said. A small, wry smile touching my lips for the first time. Ethan was leaning forward again. His eyes narrowed, the gears in his investment banker brain finally starting to turn. He was connecting the dots, however impossible they seemed. The sudden appearance of my suit, the black car, the astronomical sum of money. Who, Liam? He asked, his voice low and intense. Who did you sell it to? A tech investment firm out of Silicon Valley, I said. You've probably never heard of them. And for how much? He breathed, the question hanging between us, heavy with the weight of years of judgment and dismissal. This was the moment, the reveal, the culmination of everything. I could have been magnanimous. I could have been gentle. But I thought about the crumpled dollar bill, about the laughter, about the lecture on rock bottom, and I decided they didn't deserve gentle. They deserved the unvarnished, brutal, world-shattering truth. The final acquisition price, I said, looking him directly in the eye, was $28.5 million. The silence that followed was the most profound I have ever experienced. It wasn't just an absence of sound. It was an absence of thought, of air, of reality. I watched as the color drained from both of their faces. Chloe's mouth opened slightly, a small, silent O of perfect shock. Ethan just stared at me, his face completely slack, his eyes wide with a look of utter, soul-deep disbelief. The golden boy, the master of the universe, the man who understood the world of money better than anyone, was looking at his failure of a little brother, and his entire worldview was being systematically dismantled, atom by atom, right before his eyes. The foundation of his life, his identity, his superiority, had just been reduced to rubble. And we all just sat there, in the ruins. The shock in the room was a tangible thing, a physical presence. It was in the way Chloe sank back into the white couch, her hand fluttering to her throat as if to check for a pulse. It was in the way Ethan's face, usually a mask of confident control, had become a blank canvas of stunned incomprehension. The number I had quoted, $28.5 million, was still hanging in the air, refusing to dissipate. It was a sum so far beyond their framework for me that their brains had simply short-circuited. For long, agonizing minutes, the only sound was the ticking of a ridiculously oversized grandfather clock in the corner of the room, each tick marking a second of their old reality dying away. Ethan was the first to find his voice, but it was a changed voice. It was thin, reedy, and full of a static I'd never heard before. That's not possible, he stammered, shaking his head slowly, as if trying to dislodge a piece of information that wouldn't fit. There has to be a mistake. Connextsphere? It was an app, a hobby. Hobbies don't sell for that. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, begging me to tell him it was a lie, a prank, a delusion. He needed it to be a lie, because if it was true, then everything he believed about me, about himself, about the very nature of the world, was wrong. It wasn't a hobby, Ethan, I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. It was my life. For 7 years, while you were climbing the ladder, I was building the entire building. While you were at dinner parties, I was eating instant noodles and debugging code at 3 in the morning. While you were getting promotions, I was getting rejection letters from investors. You only saw the struggle. You never bothered to look close enough to see the work. Chloe finally spoke, her voice a high-pitched, incredulous squeak. But we never saw anything about it. In the news, on tech blogs. A deal that big would have been everywhere. She was grasping at straws, trying to find a logical flaw in my story that would allow her world to click back into place. It was a private acquisition, I explained, the details now effortless on my tongue. The firm that bought it is known for its stealth operations. They acquire promising platforms before they go mainstream and integrate them into their own ecosystem. The deal included a very strict non-disclosure agreement. It wasn't meant to be public knowledge. I watched them exchange a look, a silent communication of dawning horror. They were beginning to understand. This wasn't a fantasy. This was real. And then, the nature of their questions began to shift. The disbelief started to recede, replaced by a frantic, almost manic curiosity. The investment banker in Ethan took over, his mind automatically trying to analyze the situation, to understand the mechanics of the deal. What was the valuation based on? He asked, his voice a little stronger now. User base? Daily active users? What was your monetization strategy? He was trying to reassert control, to bring the conversation back to a language he understood, the language of spreadsheets and profit margins. I held up a hand. Stop, I said, and the single word had enough force in it to silence him instantly. We're not going to talk about that. We're not going to dissect this like one of your business deals. Because this isn't about the money. I leaned forward, looking from his face to Chloe's, making sure I had their complete, undivided attention. This is about what happened 2 nights ago, in this house. This is about $10. The mention of the $10 was like a splash of cold water. The color rose in their cheeks. The memory of their own behavior, now cast in the harsh, unflattering light of my newfound fortune, was clearly a painful one. We need to talk about why, when I was at my absolute lowest, when I swallowed every last ounce of my pride to ask my own brother for enough money to get to a job interview, you laughed at me, I continued, my voice low and intense. You didn't just say no. You held a party. You put me on trial in your office. You lectured me. You belittled me. And you judged every single choice I've ever made. I looked directly at Chloe. You told me you wanted me to be stable. Was that what you were thinking about when you watched your husband mock me? I turned back to Ethan. And you talked about rock bottom. You thought you were teaching me a lesson. My hand went to the breast pocket of my suit jacket. But of course, the dollar bill wasn't there. But I didn't need it. The image was burned into my memory. You pulled out a $10 bill, and then you put it away. You put it away and handed me a crumpled single. A lesson, you called it. You have no idea, Ethan. You have no idea what it felt like to stand in this house, surrounded by all this stuff, and be told by my own brother that I wasn't even worth the price of a few gallons of gas. They had the grace to look ashamed. Chloe stared down at her hands in her lap, her perfect posture gone. Ethan couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at a spot on the expensive oriental rug, his jaw clenched. Liam, we had no idea, he mumbled. We were just worried. We thought you were throwing your life away. You weren't worried, I shot back, my voice rising with the force of years of pent-up frustration. You were smug. You enjoyed it. My failure made your success feel more real. It validated your life choices. Every time you called me to talk about your bonus or your new car, you were really just reminding yourself of how much better you were doing than me. I was your charity case, your family project. The artistic one you could feel sorry for. It propped up your ego. I stood up then, unable to sit still any longer. I began to pace the length of the vast living room, my footsteps silent on the thick rug. Let me tell you what was really happening while you were feeling sorry for me, I said, my voice filling the silent room. That month you called to tell me about your trip to Cabo? I was selling my grandfather's watch, the one he left me, to pay my rent. That Christmas you sent me $100 gift card and told me to buy myself something sensible? I used it to keep the electricity on so I could keep working. And 2 nights ago, when you handed me that single-dollar bill, I was less than 12 hours away from becoming financially freer than you could ever dream of being. I stopped pacing and stood in front of them, looking down at them on their white couch of judgment. So I paid off your mortgage, I said, the words now sounding simple, logical, inevitable. And I need you to understand why. It wasn't a gift. A gift is something given freely, with love. This was a transaction. This was a lesson. My lesson. For years, you've communicated with me in the only language you truly respect, the language of money. You've measured my worth in dollars, and you found it to be 0. So I decided to speak to you in your own language. I decided to make a statement so big, so loud, so undeniable, that you would have no choice but to listen. I looked at Ethan, my brother, the boy with whom I had shared a room and a galaxy of glow in the dark stars. You wanted to teach me the value of $1, so I bought your house to show you the cost of disrespect. The $1.7 million isn't the price of your home, Ethan. It's the price of your laughter. It's the bill for every condescending word, every pitying look, every single time you made me feel small so you could feel big. So, congratulations. You're mortgage-free. And we're even. I let that sink in. The idea that this wasn't an act of generosity, but an act of accounting, a settling of a debt they never even knew they owed. It was a brutal, devastating blow. And I saw it land. I saw the shame and the regret finally, truly, break through their defenses. And for the first time, I saw tears well up in my older brother's eyes. The tears in Ethan's eyes were the one thing I hadn't been prepared for. I had anticipated anger, denial, even more arrogance. I had steeled myself for accusations and frantic justifications. But the raw, undisguised shame that washed over his face was disarming. He didn't try to hide it. He just sat there, on his perfect white couch, in his perfect, paid-for house, and let the tears roll silently down his cheeks. Chloe, for her part, was frozen. Her face, which had cycled through shock, greed, and shame, was now just pale and blank. The rule book she had used to navigate her entire life had been set on fire, and she had no idea what to do next. The silence in the room stretched on, no longer tense and confrontational, but heavy with the weight of unspoken grief for a relationship that had been broken for years, even if only one of us had truly felt the pain of it. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice thick and choked with emotion. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the 2 words so quiet I almost didn't hear them. He looked up at me, his eyes red and pleading. "Liam, I am so sorry. I had no idea. I was an arrogant fool. I was a terrible brother. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't a justification. It was a confession. It was the first truly honest thing he had said to me in over a decade. He put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The sight of my brother, the invincible golden boy, the master of the universe, completely and utterly broken, did not bring me the satisfaction I had expected. There was no triumphant surge of victory. There was just a deep, profound sadness. This was the cost of our war. This was the wreckage. I sat back down, the anger that had fueled me for the past 48 hours finally dissipating, leaving me feeling hollow and exhausted. "Why, Ethan?" I asked, my voice softer now. "Why was it so important for you to see me as a failure?" He took a long, shuddering breath before he answered, his voice ragged. "Because I was jealous," he said. The admission so shocking it silenced the room again. "It sounds insane. I know. I had everything, the job, the money, the house. But you had something I didn't. You had passion. You had a dream that you were willing to sacrifice everything for. You had a fire in you. I just followed the playbook. I did what was expected of me. I climbed the ladder because that's what I was told to do. And every time I saw you, still fighting for your dream, refusing to give up, a part of me hated you for it. Because it reminded me that I had given up on any dream I might have had a long, long time ago. So I belittled your dream. I called it a hobby. Because if it was just a hobby, then my life, my safe, practical choices, were still the right ones. It was pathetic. It was my own insecurity, and I made you pay the price for it. His confession was a raw, painful, and beautiful thing. It was the truth, finally, after years of posturing and pretense. It didn't excuse his cruelty, but it explained it. And in that explanation, a tiny, fragile seed of understanding began to take root in the barren ground of our relationship. Chloe, who had been silent this whole time, finally looked at me. Her eyes were filled with tears, too. "He's right," she whispered. "I was a part of it. I was so caught up in this perfect life we were building. The image, the status, and you didn't fit into that image. I am so ashamed of how I treated you." We sat in that living room for hours, and we talked. We really talked. For the first time since we were kids, we talked about our childhood, about our parents, about the different pressures we had faced. We talked about the chasm that had opened up between us and how we had both, in our own ways, kept pushing the two sides further apart. There were more tears. There were long, painful silences. But there was also honesty. Brutal, cleansing honesty. It was getting dark outside when I finally stood up to leave. The atmosphere in the room was completely changed. The tension was gone, replaced by a kind of fragile, tentative peace. "So, what now?" Ethan asked, his voice still hoarse. He looked around his living room, at the art, the furniture, the symbols of a life he now saw with different eyes. "This house. I can't accept this, Liam. Not as a transaction. It's not right." "It's done," I said. "You can't give it back. But you're right. It can't be a transaction. Not anymore." I thought for a moment. The future of our relationship, of this house, of this money, an unwritten page. "Consider it a loan," I said, an idea forming as I spoke. "A zero-interest, indefinite loan from your brother. You can pay me back whenever you're able, or you can pay it forward. You're a powerful man, Ethan. You have connections, resources. Use them for good. Fund someone else's dream. Find another kid in a garage with a crazy idea and give them the support you never gave me. That can be your repayment." A look of profound relief washed over his face. I had given him a path forward, a way to earn back his self-respect, a way to atone. "Okay," he said, nodding slowly. "Okay, brother. I can do that." I walked to the door, with them following me. In the marble foyer, the same spot where my ordeal had begun, we stopped. There was an awkward pause, the space between us charged with everything that had been said. And then Ethan did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He stepped forward and he hugged me. It wasn't the performative, one-armed pat on the back he usually gave. It was a real hug, his arms wrapped tightly around me, his head resting on my shoulder. "I love you, little brother," he choked out. "I'm so proud of you." And I hugged him back, the years of anger and resentment melting away in that one simple embrace, leaving only the complicated, messy, but undeniable bond of family. I left their house and got into the waiting car. As we pulled away, I looked back at the grand stone-faced mansion. It no longer looked like a monument to success. It just looked like a house. My brother's house. I didn't go back to my old apartment. I had the driver take me to a hotel downtown. A nice one. I checked into a suite with a panoramic view of the city lights. I stood by the window for a long time, looking out at the sprawling metropolis. My life was a blank canvas now. I could go anywhere, do anything. I could start a new company. I could travel the world. I could set up a foundation to help young entrepreneurs, just as I had told Ethan to do. The possibilities were endless. And for the first time, that thought wasn't terrifying. It was exhilarating. My relationship with Ethan and Chloe won't be fixed overnight. There are years of hurt to overcome. Trust needs to be rebuilt, brick by painstaking brick. But for the first time, we have a foundation to build on, a foundation of truth and mutual respect. I learned a lot in those 48 hours. I learned about the corrupting nature of pride and the isolating nature of wealth. But most importantly, I learned that a person's worth is not determined by their bank account or the house they live in. It's measured by their character, their integrity, and their ability to love. My name is Liam Harrison. I once asked my brother for $10, and he laughed at me. The next day, I paid off his mortgage. But the real story, the important story, isn't about the money. It's about what it cost to finally buy back my own family.